I'm Gary Hunter, a marketing professor.
Okay, so in promotions, this would be a sub area of marketing. So you could do an entire course that's just on promotions, and promotions would get into these things like the 6 M's, right? So the 6 M's are sort of thinking about the market. That's the same market that we've been talking about all along, right? Thinking about what are your objectives. That doesn't sound like an M. Thinking about your budget. So my M's are not working so well, right? So I've got your market, your objectives, your budget. Then I've got your message and media. So I did better with a couple of M's there, right? Then after the budget, your message and media, and then you get to evaluation. So if I go back and like plug my M's, this is sort of the way we do that, right? So instead of objectives, we'll call that mission. Instead of budget, we'll call that money. And instead of evaluation, we'll call that measurement. So that gets us to sort of the 6 M's of promotions. So these are sort of often used to think about, well, if you're doing sort of a major communications or major promotional campaign, how you might break down the elements of that campaign. So part of what I've got broken up, we'll get into some of these different M's that are associated with it. So when you're using the 6 M's to sort of develop effective communications, these are also sort of steps. What market are you targeting? What's the process, or what is your mission that you're going after, right? So you might think about, in terms of mission, you might think about the buying process and how you match your selling to that. So what is this thing? This awareness, knowledge, liking, preference, conviction. Yeah, so this is just one model that sort of goes through, the way consumers might think through that whole process of living it out, right? So that's the buying process, right? So these different buying processes, we have other models that get into the buying process. What are some other models that get into the buying process? Awareness, interest, desire, and action. So that's exactly right. So this is another component, sort of this awareness, interest, desire, and action is another model that we think about. What's the simplest components that we break the buying process down into? The three. Yeah. So what are the three components that we break just those three process components into? Okay, learn, feel, do, right? So learn, feel, do is sort of that component, right? So what are those three things? Learn, feel, do. Learn is what? Yeah, getting information about the product, the cognitive stuff, right? So this is very cognitive, right? So this is cognitive. What's the feel part? You start to build affection, that's right. So that's exactly right. So affect, cognition. So that whole side that's sort of more about heart and mind. So we talked some about share of heart, share of mind. See, all this is sort of related to this buying process, and the behavior is really the do part. So those are kind of the components that when we're thinking about people, that we might break those down into. So kind of understanding, sometimes they don't go in this sequence, right? So this is a sequence that starts with awareness. So awareness is cognitive or affective? Cognitive, right? So awareness is cognitive, right? So this is sort of starting with cognitive or cognition or learning on the top side, right? And then it works its way through knowledge is what? Cognitive, so liking, affective, right? So see how this is getting more emotional. Then preference and conviction are sort of like things that are what? Your beliefs, your preferences, your behaviors, right? So these are sort of moving through those types of things, right? So you can, you don't have to start with awareness, or you don't have to start with cognition, right? So purchase is definitely a behavior, right? So you can start with emotive things, right? You can start with the affective side. So that's often called impulse buying. So if people sort of buy through an impulse buying process, that's usually a process that starts with an emotive component. So impulse buying, when I think impulse buying, I think chocolate at the checkout, right? And sort of just at the right level for kids to kind of get to it, right? So as you sort of do that, that's very much an impulse buy. So the impulse buying can kind of go much higher in terms of like the target markets. So it's not, impulse buying isn't always kid stuff, right? So impulse buying can go much higher, but it's if you think about it that way, you think about it as more kind of emotive and less of a rational decision. So you start with the emotions a lot of times, then you may actually go to the purchase, which is the behavior. So you may go affective, behavior, then cognitive, right? That is, I bought it, or I saw it, I had this emotional thing, I thought I would like it. I bought it, then I tried it, but I didn't like it, right? So sometimes you don't. So sometimes you're sequenced, but you're often just trying to break down what's the behavioral process, and then you're trying to match that to that. So this is sort of the learn, feel, do perspective. So there are other hierarchy models, right? These are all different response hierarchy models. So you basically just sort of use the ones that you like and that you gravitate to, and that helps you to see the world in a different way, or to think about how these steps might work, so that you just have a feel for how this cognitive, affective, and these behavioral components kind of work together. Yeah. Well, okay, so some people will actually talk about buying as being low involvement, high involvement kind of decisions is one of the ways it's often thought of when you're starting to categorize all types of buying. So low involvement buying is often where you don't really engage much at all cognitively. So low involvement buying would be things like, this is the brand of laundry detergent I buy, right? So there's the Tide, grab it, next item, grab it, next item, grab it. That becomes sort of habitual and very low involvement. High involvement is where you actually do more cognitive processing. So if I'm actually going to go out and buy a car, or I'm going to I'm thinking about an elective surgery, right? Then I'm going to think about that a lot more, right? But you can see how there's a different level of involvement in elective surgery versus even buying a car. So this is sort of more of a continuum, right? So that's the way I would think about high involvement and low involvement. Low involvement it's really talking about how much you get involved cognitively with the decision, high and low, right? So elective surgery may be even higher than buying an automobile, but buying an automobile is higher in terms of involvement than buying my toothpaste, right? So see, this is sort of so you think about those more sort of as continuums, and they could help you to kind of think about, okay, which processes do I want to stimulate? So if I'm selling high involvement cognitive processing, buying processes, right? Then emotion is probably not going to help me as much, right, in terms of being persuasive, right? I need to be cognitive. I need to sort of talk about what are the real benefits and gains of doing this surgery. What are the downside risks? Because I'm basically kind of, even without the law, I might need to do that, right? You have to do it because of the law, but even without the law, I might kind of get into some of those details because I'm kind of assuming that my client or my patient is educated. So different markets have different things. When I get into different types of arguments, I'll talk about one-sided arguments versus two-sided arguments. So two-sided argument is best used when you're going against an educated audience or an educated target. A one-sided argument is basically where you just give the pros. So if you just gave all the pros of this elective surgical procedure, this is all the good things that can happen, and you didn't talk about sort of the risks that are associated with that elective procedure, that works best with an audience that's not educated. Because the educated audience is going to sort of question, that's sort of the idea of it. So the one-sided and two-sided arguments have different targets that are associated with them, right? So you're often sort of trying to work through those. So these are all different ways to overlay how to think about buyers. But but essentially any sort of processing that you do that kind of helps you to understand better your buyers and your target audiences will help you to kind of better understand how to craft your message. So how do we match our selling process with that buying process? With buying processes and selling processes, you're sort of trying to match those different things. So the more you sort of think about and understand how buyers buy, how your different target markets might work, how different segments might work, then the better you can sort of match your selling process to try to achieve that outcome. Okay, so push and pull demand. This is one of those things where you have to cover it every marketing class. If it was Marketing 101, the very first class in the undergraduate program, push and pull is one of those concepts that gets into that category. So what does push and pull refer to? Okay, that's pretty close because all you're going to do is basically add an intermediary, right? A middleman who's in there, for a P&G, that middleman is a retailer or something, right? So if you add that middle person into the push and pull, then you start getting a feel. So you got a producer, you got some intermediary or retailer, right? And then you got some end user, right, on that side. So if I'm sort of like trying to create demand from the intermediary side, I'm trying to push my products to the market, right? So I'm trying to load up the retailers. I'm trying to get the retailers so they've got a ton of stuff that's my stuff, and if they have my stuff, then they sell my stuff. So that's sort of a push strategy. So that's a strategy that's often sort of implemented through a sales force, right? So if a sales force is sort of trying to push products to retailers, then they're sort of loading those retailers up with the products, and that's push. And so pull is basically when you're going to the end consumer and you're trying to say to the end consumer, go to your retailer and buy this product. this is a really hot product. I'm doing a Super Bowl ad, so I'm going to kind of I'm going to try to do a pull strategy, and I want them to kind of go to the retailer and say, where are the Frito chips, right? Where are these products that I'm sort of after, right? So what happens most of the times is you'll implement both of these together, right? Because you got to push the product to the market, right? So when you do this promotional activity that's a pull activity, the supply and demand sort of matches out, right? Because you're still trying to create these efficient supply chains that are associated with that. So your estimates of how much demand is this promotional activity, how much demand will the Super Bowl create becomes fairly important. And then your push strategies. So sometimes this takes a little bit more planning than at other times, right? When does it take a lot of planning, do you think? What are some operational things that make this matching push and pull complicated? Okay, so unpredictability of demand, so the difficulty in forecasting it can be an issue, right? Okay, so some ambiguity about what's going on in the market from the competitive side. How much marketing dollars do you actually have on a pull strategy? Okay, so the marketing dollars in terms of like creating, how much money do you have to kind of create that much demand from the pull side? Yeah, I'm going to give you a really good example of that, right? Because what product did you use in operations? Use the cell phone. Okay, so a cell phone, so it's sort of like getting raw materials together, throwing these raw materials together and making a cell phone, right? And so there's some period of time that's required to get those raw materials together and then move it through a production process and stuff like that. Okay, so when PepsiCo owned KFC, right, they did a promotion, right? They did a promotion that was a hot wings promotion. It was the first time that hot wings were sort of made available through a mass fast food restaurant chain like that. I mean, we've had hot wings. Hot wings are sort of like bar products, so they've been out in bars for quite a while, right? But they decided they were going to do a big promotion on hot wings. So they started, they bought out a lot of ad space. They pushed hot wings. They own the whole chain, right? So they own the restaurants. So production cycles, right? Let's say demand sort of far exceeds supply for hot wings. What's the production cycle for hot wings? What is a hot wing? It's a chicken wing, right? So how do we produce chicken wings? You got to make chickens, right? So how long does it take to make chickens? You got to hatch. You got to like lay eggs and hatch them, right? So, how difficult is it to accelerate that process? Let's say the demand for chicken wings is extremely high, which is what happened. They created an enormous amount of demand on the pull side, right? Consumers are going to the restaurants. They want hot wings. They're dying to get them, and then what happens? There are no hot wings available because there's no supply, because they exhausted the supply of chicken wings on the planet, right? So what happens to the hot wings campaign? Dissatisfied customers. You create a lot of dissatisfaction. But what do they do with that campaign? They kill it. You got to kill that thing as quickly as you realize that you're out of wings. Right? So they kill the campaign. They've got to postpone it. Then what do they do before they do the campaign again? They have a lot of chickens. Right? They get a lot of hens that are busy. A lot of eggs are laid. A lot of chicken wings are produced over some period of time, right? So they've got supply built up so that when they go into the second one, they've got a better feel for what is the estimate going to be, or what's the demand going to be for chicken wings when we sort of go into that. That's push and pull strategies and some of the complexities that are associated with kind of matching those and mapping them out. So, this is also push and pull is often what creates friction between marketing and engineering, right? So some of you guys work in that space, and you come in with an immediate hate towards marketing. Is anyone in that space or not? We hate marketing because they didn't forecast the right number of cell phones, right? Could be cell phones, but it could be chicken wings, right? These are the different sorts of products. They're different issues that kind of create things, right? Yes. Okay. So psychologists will talk about factors that are persuasive. So there's a lot of psychology in marketing. You guys have picked up on that, I think, right? Is that fair? Okay. So psychologists will talk about scarcity as being like one of those really persuasive components, right? So if you can create the image of scarcity, you can create sort of demand for your product. So some plans will essentially do that, right? When I was in, so this is a Scottsdale, Arizona story. So Scottsdale is sort of set up, right? It's only like a 50-year-old city or something like that. But one of the most famous fast food restaurant chains in California is called what? In-N-Out. Okay, I haven't told you guys about In-N-Out burgers, have I? I don't think. Okay, In-N-Out. So In-N-Out. So why do you like? Why are In-N-Out burgers great? Or In-N-Out? You don't know? You guys? They're fresh. Yes. So fresh is kind of one of the big components. Fresh kind of goes into it. All the products that kind of go into In-N-Out burgers very fresh. They have this distribution system where they sort of get all the fresh stuff there: fresh buns, fresh bread, fresh lettuce, fresh tomatoes, fresh fries. A lot like Five Guys, right? Five Guys sort of has that same sort of thing. You know, potatoes are sort of stacked up out there, those sorts of things. But they only existed in California for years. So they decided, okay, we're going to kind of venture east. So if you're in California and you venture east, what are your choices? Arizona's one, Utah, Arizona, Nevada. Maybe some of those. So Arizona's kind of a dominant. That's sort of an obvious choice, except for maybe Vegas might have been a good choice, right, for In-N-Out burgers. But they decided to go to Phoenix, right? So they come to the Phoenix area. How many restaurants do they open? One. Exactly. Okay, so they open one In-N-Out burger in Arizona, in the whole state of Arizona. So this In-N-Out burger is sort of located in a mall, huge mall, all sorts of parking space and stuff like that. What happens to that mall parking space area? It's packed, right? It's mostly like pylons and rows and off-duty police officers directing traffic so you can get in for your 1 hour wait for the In-N-Out burger, right? So it almost defeats the whole purpose of the idea of In-N-Out, because the In-N-Out concept is you drive through and you're in and out of the place. It takes you no time at all to pick it up, right? But this is sort of creates, so what sort of signal does that send to people about In-N-Out burger if you're just going to the mall for shopping? So anyone who's sort of going to the mall notices this huge line and wonders, well, okay, what's this line about, right? And it creates a lot of demand for In-N-Out burgers. So then they just so this is rationing and scarcity. They create a ton of demand and a ton of awareness, right? So they've got the awareness way up by the time they do their second one, their third one, their fourth one, or whatever, right? So yes, marketers definitely use scarcity as an element in persuasive selling.
Editions is probably the same idea, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Limited editions.
Limited editions, yeah. So, so some of this stuff some of it kind of gets a stale feel to it, right? So and it becomes more obvious to consumers over time, because if you do a limited edition, people say limited, yeah, how limited, right? You know what I'm saying? So marketers have to kind of come up with other ways of creating scarcity in the minds of consumers and stuff like that. So BMW comes to the United States. They do the Z3 Roadster, right? They introduced the Z3 Roadster. The Z3. What was the nature of that car when it first came in? Why was this is a car that used scarcity again as part of its marketing campaign? James Bond. Okay, so James Bond drives what kind of car before the BMW? Only Aston Martin, never anything else, right? The whole history of the program, that's all James Bond ever drove, right? So where do you create the promotional ad for this? Where was it promoted mostly? What types of ads do you think BMW did with this? This was sort of pre-social media. Ads in the movie itself, right? So it only had like a 90-second clip in the movie itself, right? In the James Bond movie.
Pay attention, 007. First, your new car. BMW. Agile 5 forward gears, all points radar. Self-destruct system, and naturally, all the usual refinements. Now, this I'm particularly proud of. Behind the headlights, Stinger missiles.
Excellent. Just the thing for unwinding after a rough day at the office.
Need I remind you, 007, that you have a license to kill, not to break the traffic laws?
I wouldn't think of it.
Good.
But BMW did all these different things that were associated. This was at that time it was called sort of non-traditional marketing because it was pre-social media. But what they did is they sort of used scarcity a lot. They took the car and they said, okay, well, let's give this to some people who sort of are experts, because source credibility becomes kind of a component, right? You want your source to be trustworthy, you want your source to be likable, and you want them to be an expert in a particular category. So if you got the BMW and you're trying to launch that, you want to give it to people just to kind of talk about it without any control. This is pre-internet, pre-social media days. Who are the experts on cars who talk about cars at the time? This has been probably 10 or 15 years. It was late night shows, right? So if you think like late night talk shows, Jay Leno. So Jay Leno is sort of kind of the guy. Jay Leno, they give him a car. He sort of does some different things with it on his show, on his program. And they basically sort of created advertising and buzz. It was called buzz about the product itself, right? So the scarcity is a way of creating buzz. Buzz is word of mouth. Word of mouth is like unpaid for personal communication, which is very effective. So in the promotional slide, we were talking about this 2x2 that I was talking about earlier, right? Word of mouth is really important. It's become even more important in the social media era because what is social media sometimes referred to as? It's really close. Yeah, world is called world of mouth, right? So world of mouth is very much related to the idea of word of mouth, right? So word of mouth promotion is kind of there. So a lot of these scarcity ideas that we're kind of talking about are ideas that sort of work through this word of mouth kind of buzz creating activity.
All the best with your efforts to master marketing and sales. I'm Gary Hunter, and I hope you have a great day.